Welcome back everyone, it's Eric from Arcania. Today we have some insane news to go over for the Pokemon TCG, and that is going to be we finally have the VMAX mechanic revealed in full after many months of waiting for this Pokemon mechanic to finally get shown off. You know, we did get it teased back at Worlds back in August, and all we had really seen was this kind of a shadow of a card. It was like a blank card that was gargantuan, had 330 HP, but that's really all we had seen since. You know, in the meantime, we did get Pokemon V revealed, though Pokemon VMAX we knew to be a different mechanic, so we still knew that there were some secrets left to kind of be revealed. And today's the day, we finally have our first concrete details on VMAX, including 3 different VMAX cards that we are going to be going over in this video. So we do still, I think, for me personally at least, have some questions concerning how this mechanic is going to work, but I think based on the reveals that recently happened, we should have basically 95% of our questions answered here. So in total, we did get 3 Pokemon VMAX revealed, one of which though is going to be a promo, and we did get concrete info as well that there's going to be 4 VMAX Pokemon in the Sword and Shield set. So even though we have 3 that we're going to be looking at here, only 2 of these are from the actual Sword and Shield set, meaning there are 2 other VMAXs that we don't yet have any scans or information about just yet. But, you know, we waited so many months for these reveals. I think, you know, these will hold us over until we get information about some of these other VMAXs. So let's just take a look at these cards generally and go over some of the information about these. So as you guys can see, much like with the teaser card that we saw back at Worlds, these things are gargantuan in size. The ones we're looking at today are going to range from 300 to 340 HP. So absolutely some of the most massive Pokemon the game has ever seen, even eclipsing Magikarp Wailord GX, which previously was one of the tankiest Pokemon the game had yet to see. And for pretty good reason too. If we look at the bottom right hand corner of the card, there is the VMAX rule. So much like with Pokemon V that give up 2 prizes, Pokemon VMAX are giving up 3 prizes. So that's kind of the trade-off. You know, we do have to evolve into these as opposed to tag teams. They give up 3 prizes, but to kind of reward you for jumping through hoops and evolving, you do get an HP buff. So even though I think at a glance there is a lot of shock value built into the HP of these cards, I think it's actually kind of fair in a way, just because there's really not much incentive to play a Evolution VMAX when you could just play a tag team that has roughly the same amount of HP, more attacks, etc. So I think the HP is actually totally fair in this regard, though this does raise some concerns, however, about the potential to abuse healing cards as they get printed in the Sword and Shield era of the game, but that's kind of another topic altogether. And speaking of evolving, you'll see at the top left hand corner of the card, it says they do evolve from their Pokemon V counterpart. So this kind of ties into how some people thought these are going to be kind of akin to Mega Evolutions. And yeah, this is kind of the same way, much like when Pokemon EX evolved. We now have Pokemon V that can evolve into these stronger forms of Pokemon VMAX. And it doesn't appear there are any strings attached in terms of how we evolve. There's no spirit links like with Megas. There's no ending your turn mechanic. There's nothing like Pokemon Level X where you have to be in the active spot. And it looks like by and large, these things are just going to evolve pretty normally here. And as you can see below the text where it says they evolved, these are designated as being Gigantamax Pokemon. So these are going to be, of course, the Gigantamax counterparts to what we saw in the Sword and Shield video game, which is kind of what we all did expect here. Since these are designated as Gigantamax Pokemon, I'm sure we will have cards that are going to call out Gigantamaxes, much like where we have cards that call out Ultra Beasts or tag teams, much like in that way. So I'm sure we will have some mechanic that is kind of tied to Pokemon being designated as Gigantamax. And the remaining thing on these cards we have yet to point out is they all have just one singular attack. And that seems to be kind of a trend for all of these. Much like with Mega Evolution cards, I think this will kind of be the norm for Pokemon VMAX. They're going to be these huge gargantuan Pokemon, and they're just going to have one really strong attack, much like with Mega Pokemon EX of the past. So let's get into it and take a look at some of these cards individually. So the first one we are going to be looking at is going to be the new Meowth VMAX. And much like I said already, Meowth is going to be one of the promo VMAXs. This will not be in the actual Sword and Shield set. But Meowth is going to have 300 HP, so this is going to be the weakest of the VMAXs that we have seen up to this point. has a weakness to fighting, a 2 retreat cost, and its one singular attack is going to be GMAX Gold Rush, 200 damage for 4 colorless energy, and you draw 3 cards. So 200 is definitely a pretty sizable amount of damage. You're basically going to 2-shot everything, and oh my god, I can't even believe I'm saying that. We are saying 200 damage is a 2-shot. I remember in the 2012 format when we finally first got EXs back in the game, 90 damage was kind of looked at as the ideal 2-shot sort of number to hit for. So Meowth VMAX, it's crazy at 200 damage has to 2-shot things, but hey, that's just the state of the game that we're in right now. So this stack is kind of okay. You know, it's a 2-shot. You get to draw some cards in the process, which is good. You know, draw 3 as a supporter, not very good, but draw 3 as something like an item, an ability, or just like the byproduct of an attack like this, actually pretty solid. So that is good. Being colorless means we have some flexibility in terms of how we can get powered up. So we can abuse things like triple acceleration energy since Meowth is in evolution. We can abuse Welder, even things like Malamar, Pikarom, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how we want to power up this Meowth VMAX. And without seeing the entire Sword and Shield set, it's really hard to say, you know, how these cards are going to fit in. So just generally speaking, I'm not going to go quite as in-depth on kind of my thoughts about the competitive viability of these cards until we get the full set list, or at least a much more complete one. So of course we'll be going over these cards in much more depth in our actual full Sword and Shield set review, or at least our first impressions video that will inevitably come out as well. So card seems like it has potential though. You know, like I said, 2-shots everything, flexible attack cost, might have some potential. So the next Pokemon VMAX we're going to be looking at is going to be Lapras VMAX. So this one is going to be a little bit tankier than Meowth, has 320 HP. And much like with all these Pokemon, Lapras just has one singular attack, and this one's called GMAX Pump for 3 colorless energy, does 90 plus 30 more for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. So if we briefly just run through the math, we're going to be hitting for 180 if we just fulfill the base attack cost with water energy. So this is an attack kind of similar to the Keldeo EX of the past, or even the Keldeo V that looks to be coming out in Sword and Shield as well, but just kind of a little bit juiced up since we, you know, are a VMAX evolution. It does make sense we are rewarded for evolving in that regard. So 180, it's a decent amount of damage. We can one-shot Deandres and even some of the like base form Pokemon V, some of the lower HP ones that will be running around. But I think this card gets more interesting if we have ways to accelerate energy onto it to buff up the attack cost. So think of something like Quagnag, maybe Lapras VMAX can be a potentially decent late game hitter where you just move all of the energy on board that you have to Lapras VMAX and just nuke whatever is in your way, and hopefully your opponent doesn't have a response to deal with this massive 320 HP Pokemon that can just one-shot most of their stuff. So that's an area where this card might see play. Also, Blastoise Piplup GX could be a method of accelerating energy onto this as well. Again, without the entire Sword and Shield set, it's hard to say where its best home will be, but it definitely has some options even without seeing anything else from this new set. And finally, the beefiest of all these Pokemon VMAX we're looking at today is going to be Snorlax VMAX. So kind of appropriate, they just announced Gigantamax Snorlax for the video game as well. So it makes sense we are going to get a Snorlax VMAX as well. But this one's 340 HP, so this right now is the highest amount of HP of any Pokemon in the card game. So this is definitely a very, very tanky Pokemon. Has a 4 retreat cost, which is worth pointing out because we can abuse things like buff padding to even get this thing up to 390, which is absolutely insane. Of course, Pokemaniac also exists, so we can search this and Snorlax V out with that to get set up maybe. But Snorlax VMAX has just one attack here. Gmax Fall for 3 colorless energy, 60 plus 30 more for each of your benched Pokemon. So guys, if we just run through the math really quick on this, if we have a full bench, we're going to be hitting for 210, and 210 for basically just one attachment, because you have to remember we do have triple acceleration energy, or just Welder, that would work as well, a Welder and 1 fire energy. You know, 210 is a lot of damage, but it's really not getting into one-shot range or anything like that. So probably we're just going to be two-shotting things most of the time, but with 390 HP, if you do have a buff padding as your tool of choice in a Snorlax VMAX deck, you know, I think we're content with two-shotting everything. And of course, knocking out some of the other existing Pokemon GX, and of course, one prize Pokemon as well that are still going to be in the format. So yeah, this guy's pretty tanky. And then if you think even to expanded where we have things like Skyfield, the damage output on this thing just climbs even higher. So if in expanded you have a sky field with a full bench of 8 Pokemon, you're going to be hitting for 300 damage, and that's without any damage modifiers. That's not factoring in something like Muscle Band to climb up to 320, Professor Kukui to even get up to 340 if you want to KO opposing Snorlax VMAX decks if you want to. So yeah, this in expanded seems pretty insane. It's funny, we just covered the Mega Rayquaza deck in the expanded format, updated with some new cards, and Snorlax almost kind of makes Mega Ray obsolete after finally getting some cards to become a more viable deck again. So very interesting to see how this card does. I think this is probably the most exciting just initially that we're seeing. That's at least where my head is at. I think this one's probably the one with the most potential initially. We'll have to wait and see. Again, guys, we don't have the full Sword and Shield set, as I keep reiterating, so we'll have to see where these things are going to land once we get info about more of the cards out there. It does have fighting weakness though, so we might have to keep in mind some of the fighting Pokemon that will be in the format and keep our eyes peeled for any new potential threats that might emerge in Sword and Shield to deal with Snorlax VMAX as well. Alrighty guys, so that is going to be all 3 of the Pokemon VMAX that we did get revealed, but nevertheless, like I kind of mentioned already, I do still have some questions that didn't get answered by these reveals that just happened. So the first of which actually kind of ties into something we were wondering about in our Sword and Shield speculation video, which we posted not too terribly long ago. I will have a link up in the top right hand corner of the screen if you guys do want to go watch that. Me and Xander had a ton of fun making that video. But one of the things we mentioned in there is the potential for VMAX, or the max in the name specifically. Is that actually going to count as part of the name, or is this just going to be a Lapras V, much in the way that level X's previously existed before? So what I mean by that is, with Pokemon level X previously, you could only have 4 Pokemon of that name in total in your deck, which means you could only have in total 4 copies of Gardevoir and Gardevoir level X in your deck. So that means you can't have 4 Gardevoir and 4 of the level X. You could have 2 and 2 or 3 and 1 as an example. So I'm very curious what the classification of the word max is here. I'm not sure if Lapras V is the name and max is just a kind of descriptor of the card, or is this part of the name? And that does make a big difference in terms of how these cards are going to function. And so if that's the case, it's hard to build around VMAXs, and they basically just have to complement your deck, much like in the way that level X's did very frequently back in the day. And so you guys know me, I'm a big fan of one prize decks. I'm a big fan of stage 2 decks with rare candy. And the more that cards with 330 HP and all of these absurdly huge, tanky, aggressive Pokemon exist, the worse it is for the standard sort of cards that get printed. So again, this isn't something we have clarification on just yet. If I had to put money on it, more than likely Max is part of the name, and you will be able to have 4 Lapras V and 4 Lapras VMAX. But like I said, fingers crossed, I'm really hoping that the Max isn't counted as part of the name here, and that you're going to be forced to have some combination of your Vs and VMAXs. So another question I think some people might have is that, well, these are all basic Pokemon, so what's that going to mean for Gigantamax Charizard as an example whenever it gets represented in the TCG as well? You know, is the base Pokemon V form still going to be a basic, or is it going to be like a stage 3 type of thing where the V or VMAX has to evolve from a normal Charizard? You know, I think more than likely Charizard V is just going to be a basic Pokemon, and the Gigantamax Charizard is just going to be kind of like a stage 1 like the rest of these cards here. So I think we can pretty safely kind of assume that. So I think the question that I have next is, since these are all Gigantamax Pokemon, what happens when we run through all of the different Gigantamaxes that exist in the Pokemon universe? So right now, at the time of filming, we know of, I believe it's 26 different Gigantamax Pokemon, if you include Pokemon that aren't currently in the game, like Gigantamax Melmetal and Gigantamax Snorlax. And if we see the Sword and Shield era pump out Gigantamaxes at around 4 to 5 per set, then we're going to have about 6 sets worth of Gigantamax Pokemon. So what happens to the VMAX mechanic from there? Are we going to start seeing other non-Gigantamax Pokemon printed as Pokemon VMAX? I think that would seem kind of odd if that were the case, or they could very well just kind of loop the VMAXs and just make different ones. You know, we've seen Pokemon get represented as GXs multiple times, like with cards like Solgaleo and Lunala as an example, where they get different cards of the same name printed. So that could be the case with these Gigantamaxes as well. Or of course, as time goes on, if Pokemon does start adding DLC to the Sword and Shield video games and including new Gigantamaxes, that could also increase the potential card pool that we're going to have to pull from as Gigantamaxes as well. So that's also, I think, just more of a long-term concern I have for this mechanic is how they're going to handle that as they inevitably do start to run out of Gigantamax forms to include in the TCG. So the other question I had is a more insignificant one, but one I'm still kind of wondering about nonetheless. So it is reported that in Japan, the VMAX Pokemon are actually a new rarity over there, and they do have a texture as well. So one thing I'm wondering is, are there even going to be full art counterparts to some of these cards? I imagine we'll still see full art counterparts to the normal Pokemon V, since they are not textured, and they still, even though their art takes up the majority of the card, they still aren't quite what most people would think of as full art. But for the VMAXs, they all do look like full arts. Like, I don't really see how you would have a full art counterpart to this, since these already take up the entire art of the card here, and they already have a texture. And if that's the case, I'm actually really happy about that, because in the Sun and Moon era of the game, especially towards the end, there's just honestly far too many rarities of cards, to be honest. You know, think of for your average GX now, you have a normal rarity, a full art version, an alternate full art version, and a rainbow rare, and that's excluding any promos that get printed as well. So in one set, you have 4 rarities of the same card, which is honestly a pain for people who collect. I know we are a more competitive channel, but you know, I collect a little bit as well, and I've always hated that so many arts of the cards exist. You know, give us one full art if you want, or maybe give us like one secret rare version, but we really just don't need 4 arts of every card anymore. So I really hope this is a good sign for that going forward. That is something I was also wondering about. But again, I think the big takeaway here is we don't really know for sure if VMAX is the name or if V is the name, with Max as a descriptor of the card in some way. So that's the big thing we are still going to be wondering about after these reveals. So that's going to wrap up all of the info that we currently have on the Pokemon VMAX that just got revealed. And guys, I have to say, it's been really nice to finally get some clarification on how these cards are going to work. I know people have been waiting for a long time to get a better idea about these. Now, as far as my personal take on VMAXs, you know, I kind of have mixed thoughts. I haven't been the most optimistic for the V mechanic in general, just because by and large, it does look to be kind of a return to the EX style mechanic, which I have to say I am not a fan of whatsoever. I actually would say the EX era, not the first EX era, which was the good one, but the second EX era, starting with Next Destinies, actually entered the game into, I think, one of the worst points it's ever been, to be honest, just because we saw a hyper aggressive format that was dominated by primarily basic Pokemon, and that's a big gripe I have with even the current pre-Sword and Shield era with the introduction of tag teams. So Pokemon V kind of looked to return us to that era, which is a huge red flag, I think, for anyone I think that's been playing the game for a substantial amount of time. And of course, VMAXs are kind of like the Mega EX counterpart to the Pokemon V that we saw back in the XY era. Now, even with that being said, and me being a little bit negative, I do want to give Pokemon some credit. I think it's great that they made the VMAX Pokemon 3 prizes. I think that had to be absolutely necessary. The fact that they only have 1 attack, also very, very good. Especially when we compare that to tag teams, which have 2 and 3 attacks sometimes, including an ultra powerful GX attack that can only be used once per game. I think that was a great balancing decision on Pokemon's part. And I know it's a kind of a minor thing, but I'm really happy that these Gigantamax Pokemon are full arts, which kind of implies we're not going to have the insane multiple rarity madness that we currently have in the Sun and Moon era. So as a collector, I'm a little bit happy to also see that as well. I think another reassuring thing about the VMAX cards is that a lot of the normal one prize Pokemon have also started to see HP buffs along with these. So I will have a link down below to Pokebeach's story that has all of these cards, including a bunch of Pokemon V and non-Pokemon V that didn't get discussed in this video if you guys want to take a look at those. But even the non-Pokemon V have slightly higher HPs than we're used to. Like there's even a Rillaboom that has 190 HP, just as an example. So if we are starting to see power creep in these, you know, strong Pokemon V, VMAX, like ultra rare mechanics, it's really good that normal Pokemon are also getting a buff alongside these. I think that's going to be really important. And that's also really good too, because it means normal Pokemon V can better compete even with the current tag teams and GXs that are in the format. So that is another silver lining to this power creep that we're seeing. It is at least applying to the non-ultra rares as well. So I think the big thing that's left unanswered for me, that's really going to determine my thoughts on this, are going to be the support for and against Pokemon V, and also the naming issue I kind of went over earlier in this video. Most of us here, and most people I know in generally that play, really want to see non-GXs, non-Pokemon V, one prize, evolution, and stage 2 Pokemon be able to exist in a competitive space alongside these other Pokemon. So again, if the max isn't part of the name, I think that increases the chances of that substantially, which makes me much more fond of the VMAX mechanic as a whole. So I think those are, again, some of my reservations for the moment. And we'll get a better idea once the full Sword and Shield set, of course, is revealed. But for the moment, we have a lot to go off of. And it's really exciting, like I said, to finally get a hard look at some of these cards. But what do you guys think? You know, I went over a lot here. What do you think about this mechanic? Do you like the way they are handling VMAX and Gigantamax Pokemon? Sound off down below in the comment section. We would love to hear your feedback and what the rest of the community is feeling about these new cards. But if you did enjoy this content today, feel free to like and subscribe, and consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up some merch from our online store, rarecandytcg.com. It would mean a lot. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.